Welcome to App Stories, a weekly exploration of the world of apps. Today's show is brought to you by two great iOS apps. Today, an app for forming habit development and health tracking, and Zones, a time zone converter. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is my co-host, Federico Viticci. Hi, Federico.
Hey, John. How's it going?
It's going really well. It's a nice summer day here, and we're recording a little earlier in the week, so it's a little different. But we've schedules required, and you're working on. It sounds like you're deep in the in the review still.
Time has no meaning for me anymore. Like, what is a Tuesday? What does it mean? Like, all I know is I'm putting 7 hours a day into just writing and navigating my mind map, which is more resembling of like a city map at this point. So I don't even know. Is it earlier in the week? Is it not?
Right.
I don't know.
Right. You finish writing, you go to bed, you get up, you have your espresso.
Yes.
You play with your dogs, then you start writing again. And it's just back and forth, right?
Yes.
Yes. Same thing every day.
For 2, maybe 3 weeks. Yeah.
All right.
That's what's been happening. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you know what we're going to do before we get into our topic today is I thought I would do a little Ulysses follow-up because a few people on Twitter asked me how I use the app. And I didn't really get into it very deeply last time. I know you talked about your theme and you talked about some of the organization of it. So I thought I'd just kind of lay that out real quick, and then we'll get on to what's going to be the main topic for the day.
All right. Yeah.
So I have it. I started out very much like you because I think you started using the app about a month or two before I did, and I saw what you were doing with it, and I set it up in a similar way, but it's evolved over time. I am using the same theme as you are, the Teachy theme, because I do like what you did. I like the colors that you picked, and I am almost always in dark mode. I almost never switch that over. I just like, it just feels easier on my eyes. And the font that I'm using is Courier Prime, which I like a lot. It's a monospace font that is a takeoff on the Courier theme that looks a lot nicer than regular Courier. And it's a free font that you can find online. We'll put a link into the show notes. And it's been kind of my go-to. I also like source code sans a lot too, but that I like a little better in things like Xcode. I don't use it to write in as much.
That's a fine choice. Source code sans.
Yeah.
I like the font. I think it's also used in editorial, the text editor app. So yeah, good choice.
Yep, that's nice. A good one. And then in the sidebar, I've got some groups that are like yours, but I've got it split up just into areas of projects, basically. I've got one for sponsorships, another that's templates for things that we publish regularly that look similar week to week. I've got one for Mac Stories, Club Mac Stories, my own company, Scribner, and then an other, which is really a place to experiment with storing either resource documents. For a while, I thought I might use Ulysses almost as a note-taking and reference app, but I haven't really done that as much because I try to keep it as uncluttered as possible. So it's really just the things I'm writing. But there are a few reference documents in there for things like how we do formatting on Club Mac Stories and that sort of thing. And then I have an archive, which is split into 3 parts, which is Mac Stories, Club Mac Stories, and App Stories. So that's how that's organized. And then I have one trick that I use sometimes within a particular group, which is I'll just put a blank document somewhere, and I use manual ordering because I just like to have the documents in the order that I want to see them. So I'll put that somewhere in the list of documents. If, for instance, I have a few documents that are a longer term project or are on hold for some reason, like I wrote a review, but the app hasn't been approved yet and I'm waiting, just kind of to push it down the list a little bit away for the things that I'm using on a consistent basis and regularly writing it at that particular day. And that's about it. It's pretty straightforward, but it's what works for me and the writing that I'm doing.
Very nice. Very nice. I like the trick of the separator between documents. I'm probably going to steal that. And I wanted to mention something else that I forgot about last time. What I'm going to do in Ulysses, I think, once I have all the sections and chapters of my review done, I want to set up some filters because I want to find repetitions like words or adjectives or adverbs that I use too much. So I want to set up multiple filters to easily find those repetitions in all the sheets that will make for the final review.
Right.
Instead of doing the traditional find and replace in editorial during the editing stage, I think I want to do it before I move everything back into editorial So I'm probably going to set up some filters in Ulysses. And maybe there's some other stuff that I should consider, like finding specific terms or like the names of features that I got wrong because the official documentation has different labels for those names. I'm going to play around with it.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting experiment because I, like you, I haven't really used filters extensively, but I do think that there's a lot of potential there, and it's something that I want to understand, what the best use cases are, and if there's any document that is a good place to experiment with filters, it would be your review, I think. Thanks to Today for supporting App Stories. Today is an easy-to-use habit tracking app with a quantified self approach for iPhone and Apple Watch that's an editor's choice and was also picked by Apple as a best of 2016 app on the App Store. Build a dashboard for each habit and activity, adding one or more cards that offer functionality or information that fits the particular habit and the way you want to track it. You can select a beautiful and motivational photo cover for each habit. You can use today's photo covers or pick one of your own from your camera roll. There are 8 types of cards: Apple Health charts with 40 categories, custom charts, custom counters, streak calendars, photo galleries, journal and notes, milestones/to-do lists, and based on today's newest collaboration with Welzen for meditation, a Welzen card. Use Touch ID or a passcode lock to protect your privacy. Backup and restore your data using either iCloud or Dropbox. You can set up multiple notifications per habit or activity. Today also supports rich notifications. You can access basic data for your habits straight from Spotlight Search, or you can check in quickly using its notification widget. The set of cards included with Today is continuously expanded to include cards with new functionality that is useful for habit and activity tracking or information from other apps and services. Today is also planning to introduce additional functionality and customization options for existing cards, such as new health categories and more detailed information for each health metric. On the roadmap for upcoming releases are Smart Habits, which will automatically check in based on health metrics, iPad and Mac apps, and more export options. Thanks again to Today for supporting App Stories. So today we're going to talk about the Files app in iOS 11. Just kind of do a little preview, and Federico's obviously been spending a ton of time looking at this, studying it, and we've both watched the WWDC sessions about the Files app, and we thought we would preview it and talk to everyone a little bit about what it's going to mean for you when you move over to iOS 11 if you haven't already gotten on the betas.
Especially coming from iOS 10. And all the previous versions of iOS, where for several years now we got the whole system based on iCloud Drive and document picker and document providers. And really to understand the difference between what we used to have and what we're going to have with iOS 11, think of it this way, that basically Apple is getting rid of the iCloud Drive app on your device. The app is becoming Files. Files is the unified place where you go and you find both iCloud Drive, which is now a destination or a source in the app, and you're going to find in the same UI without having to do the switching between locations as you do in iOS 10. You have to open a menu to switch between iCloud Drive and Dropbox. And each has its own interface, and each of these document pickers is different. Now you're going to have, if developers add support for the Files app and if they provide a file provider extension, they're going to be integrated in the same UI, the same level. So third-party storage services like Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive, and even apps that have their own storage solutions like stuff like Working Copy, for example, they're going to be first-class citizens. So in the same sidebar, you're going to be able to switch with one single tap, between iCloud Drive, Dropbox, and these other sources. There's no more document picker in the traditional sense. There's now a document browser. So in third-party apps, when you want to pick a file, you won't be forced to open the iCloud Drive interface and then tap on locations and then switch and then wait for the UI to load. Everything was super slow. Now you get this, it's basically the Files app as a view inside of another app. As an example, you're like in Mail, you're writing an email message, you want to pick an attachment, you tap on the attachments button and you open the file browser. And the file browser has all the features that you have in the Files app. So you got like your sources in the sidebar, tags, favorite folders. We're going to explain this, but to give you context, this is such a better system than what we used to have in iOS 10. And it's all integrated, it's all consistent. And really, the main idea and what you should keep in mind as you listen to this episode is that Apple wants to make third-party developers with storage services, so online services like Dropbox and the like, first-class citizens with no limitations and on the same playing field as iCloud Drive, which is quite a change from the past.
Yeah, it really is a big change. I mean, when you think back to like iOS 8 and even earlier when we had at one point all we had was OpenIn, which would copy files into another app. And we've had this slow evolution where at first there was no real UI into files. And now then we got iCloud Drive and there was kind of a file system view into the files. But as you said, there was no unified way to do that. You had to always switch the location and pull down the document provider and use that interface to get to anything other than iCloud Drive itself if you wanted to use Dropbox or Box or something like that. And now it's all been brought together in one place, so it all can be dealt with in one place, which to me, it just makes a lot more sense when you're looking at it as a user because all your stuff is right there.
Yeah. And for years, even if Apple tried to move away from the whole idea of file management is not for this age of apps and iOS, in the end, it was sort of gone back to the original problem of people just want to organize their stuff. And it's much better to organize your files and documents if you have a single place to do that, where every different location has the same features and the same design. So anyway.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive what's going on under the hood here because when you step way back, you realize that Apple's trying to solve the problem of security and of passing these files around between sandboxes, as well as doing it in an efficient manner so that you're not constantly downloading large sets of data onto your iOS device and burning through the battery.
Right. And that's the reason why there's such a huge focus on cloud services and being able to integrate with these third-party storage services into the Files app that can download and upload changes on demand. So it's not like you gotta buy, the maximum capacity for your iPad because now you're gonna have files all over the place. If developers take advantage of these features, apps like Dropbox are gonna be able to download stuff on demand and to upload the changes only when you need them, which is quite nice.
Now, is it correct that it's just the recents and the On My iPad sections that are actually on the device all the time and that those are always local?
So when you open the Files app, it's organized in two main views. The one on the left is called Recents, and the one on the right is called Browse. Browse is the main UI when you got your locations in the sidebar, where you can switch between iCloud Drive, third-party locations. You can see the recently deleted area where you can go in and restore deleted documents. And then there's a section that is called On My iPad or On My iPhone. This section is local storage only for apps that are saving documents and files into their local containers. And this section is local. It doesn't consume your iCloud Drive space, and it's local to the device. It doesn't sync to other devices. The Recents view, however, pulls in all the files you've recently used, as the name suggests. So you will find in there both local files from the local storage, files from iCloud Drive, and files that you've opened from third-party locations. However, I don't think that necessarily these files are constantly saved offline. In fact, I'm looking at my Recents view right now, and besides the fact that it's nicely sort of broken up into multiple sections. So you go into the Recents view and you get your most recent documents at the top. But then if you scroll, you're going to find shared documents, which is a feature I'm going to mention shortly. And then you will even find documents that have been assigned a tag, also one of the new features. And some of these documents, I'm looking at them right now, they have a download icon. So even if they are considered quote-unquote recents by iOS, they're not always cached offline. Because if iOS thinks the user doesn't need this document right now, I'm just going to put it back into, download mode. So if you need it again, you're going to have to wait a few seconds for it to download.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Especially it seems to be the case for me, at least with the tagged files, which they're tagged, but they're not necessarily, even though they're in recents, I don't know, these aren't really necessarily recent documents that I used.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a misnomer, I think.
Yeah, they are the most recent files belonging to that tag, but maybe you opened them like 3 weeks ago. So as I mentioned, there's a new browse section. So this app is entirely new, by the way. It doesn't look anything like the old iCloud Drive app. It takes on the new stylistic changes of iOS 11. It uses the large title option in the title, but it kind of looks like Apple Music, Apple News. There's a huge title at the top. It supports landscape mode on the iPhone Plus models. And of course, on the iPad, it's got all the new features of iOS 11, like drag and drop, and you can move documents between locations, between apps, and both on the iPhone and on the iPad. If you long tap on the files icon on your home screen, you're going to have this widget that shows you the same recent documents that we mentioned. And you can even go into the widget, into this pop-up, and tap and hold and drag the documents around. So that's very nice. But the main functionality of the browse section really is the locations area, where you will find all of these cloud sources for your documents. And of course, the main one is iCloud Drive, which in theory, the majority of iOS users have. And I should say that Apple doesn't say this officially, but basically local storage, the on my iPad or on my iPhone section, it's really not the future of this. It's there because some apps use it and because some users want to have local storage. But it looks like, it's got a gray icon. It's so limited, and clearly the future is using an online service that integrates with files. It's not local storage. It's in there for people who want the option, but I don't think Apple sees it at the future. The fact that it's got the same color as the trash, it's sort of indicative for me.
Yeah, when I went in and reorganized them, I put it right down by the trash too, because it's just I've got very little in there.
It's a color match, really. They go perfectly together.
They do.
You can, as you say, you can rearrange these locations. Once you tap, there's an edit button, you tap it, and it's sort of every location becomes a toggle. So you can deactivate it or you can enable it. And you can see how on iOS 11, if you're already on the public beta, this section will list even the iOS 10 apps that offer the legacy document providers. And that's because even if there's a new API, Apple is not breaking support for old apps. For example, in my Files app, I have stuff like Devon Think to Go or PDF Expert or Google Drive, the iOS 10 versions of these apps.
Right.
They don't have any iOS 11 support, but they show up in there because Apple is keeping compatibility with these old apps. And if you tap them, you won't see the new Files UI, which I will get to in a minute, but you will get the legacy document picker UI, so the custom UI for each app into Files. And the contrast between the legacy providers and Files is very much apparent if you try to do this on the iPad.
Yes,
because you will get.
I'm going to say it's like a shame UI. I mean, you look at it and you think, oh, when are they going to update this? Because it doesn't look good, and it's got a locations button that doesn't do anything.
Yeah, it doesn't do anything, and it opens in the middle of the screen.
Right.
And Files has a very clean, white interface. And often these document pickers have different colors. It clashes with the rest of the app, and you can tell immediately if developers are not updating their apps for iOS 11 integration with Files. I'm sure that Google will update Google Drive right away. I'm sure.
Yeah, I look forward to that in 2020. Thanks to Zones for supporting App Stories. Zones is an iOS app designed for quickly and easily viewing and converting time zones around the world. The easy-to-use time and date selection lets you pick the time in a given city and see it converted across your full list of cities to use and share with others. The included Today widget allows for quick checks of the time around the world, and you can even do quick hour-based conversions right in the widget. The app includes a database of over 1,000 cities, with more being added all the time. Zones also includes multiple themes and many options to customize the look and behavior as desired to suit your needs and tastes. Thanks again to Zones for supporting App Stories. Okay, Federico, let's move down the sidebar a little bit. We've talked a little bit about locations, that you can toggle them on and off, and it's supporting even the legacy document providers, which is going to be a nice transition because even though they don't look great, at least they're functional and you can still find what you need there. And then you can reorder them as well, which, put the ones at the top that you're going to use the most. And right now, for me, that's Dropbox and iCloud. But below that, we've got a couple more sections. We've got favorites and we've got tags, both in the sidebar. And it was not clear to me right off how you mark a favorite. How do you, I mean, favorite, I guess, is a little bit like a special kind of tag, right?
Not really. It's a section of. It's not a tag. It's a section, and the way that you add a favorite is should be explained better. But basically, you have to use drag and drop. You pick up a folder, and on the iPad, either you drag it over the favorite section.
Mm-hmm.
On the iPhone, you pick it up with one finger, and with the other finger, you navigate back into the sidebar and you drop it into the favorites
Oh,
section.
all right. That makes sense, I
Yeah.
guess. I was looking for some little star to tap and turn on.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, that's there's no like Marcus favorite feature yet. I think there should be one because relying exclusively on drag and drop can sort of become a problem for discoverability. And in this case, you have a favorites section, and people like you are gonna say, "Well, where's the favorites feature?" It's not super clear that you can drop stuff in there.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's going to be, I think that's the kind of thing that'll be hard with drag and drop initially because it's just such a different model in terms of dealing with files on iOS that people aren't used to. I mean, I'm used to picking favorites in all sorts of apps, whether you're loving a song or favoriting a tweet. You do it by tapping some sort of icon and filling it in with color basically, and you're not doing that, you're dragging it. So that's interesting. I mean, the other thing I think we ought to point out too is the contextual menu you get when you
Mhm.
hold down on a particular file. There's all sorts of new stuff in there now.
Yeah, I mean, besides the fact that you can hold down and also use drag and drop for a file, here's a thing about drag and drop. If you hold long enough, two things are gonna happen. Either you're gonna cancel the drag, so you hold down, the item lifts up, you keep holding because you change your mind, you're like, no, I don't want to drag this over anymore. You keep holding, and eventually the item kind of recedes back into the background, and you don't do the drag and drop anymore. Or if you keep holding, there's sort of an intermediate step where either the share sheet or some other contextual menu comes up. And the reason that Apple did this, I think, it's to not break compatibility with old gestures. So in the old iOS, you used to be able to, in Safari or in Mail or in any other app, usually to view a contextual menu, you hold something down. But now on iOS 11, the same gesture is drag and drop. So what Apple did is they didn't change the gesture, but they added an extra step for stuff that has a contextual menu. In our case, files. So if you hold down, first you're gonna see the lifting animation. So the file lifts up, but then if you keep holding, you're gonna have the copy and paste menu. And the copy and paste menu, as besides copy and other stuff like duplicate or rename or move, there's some other interesting options here. So you can, of course, delete. You can also share, and you can tag file. So you can tag stuff either by using this menu or by dropping an item into a tag in the sidebar. You can even open the information panel of a file that looks like the inspector of the macOS Finder, and you can also tag from here. So there's like a tags section at the bottom of the info screen. You go in there and you pick a tag, and it's done. What's interesting about this menu is that developers will be able to enhance it with custom actions. There's a variety of custom actions that developers can add to files. One of them is a button that they can add to this action menu. So I'm thinking of stuff like export to a different format, or maybe compress something and create a new file. There's all kinds of stuff that developers will be able to do with the copy and paste menu.
That's interesting. The tagging to me is super interesting because it's a lot more prominent now in iOS than it's ever been. First of all, it's got this whole lower section of the sidebar, and as you said, you can do tagging through the contextual menu, but you can also do it through the share sheet. Even they've even got a special little button in the share sheet for tagging, which is just seems strange and out of place to me. I guess I'm just not used to it yet.
And another little detail, the developers can also control the preview that appears in files. So for years, iOS had the quick look system that allows you to preview a file without having to install an app. There's even a quick look action in workflow. You feed anything you want to quick look, and a native preview comes up. But then with files, if you open up this system to just about anyone, Imagine if you're John, if you're a developer and you make an app that has a custom format for the documents that it offers. And this custom format, of course, it's your format and it doesn't have a quick look integration. So in iOS 11, developers can do two things here. There's a thumbnail API. So developers are going to be able to generate a thumbnail image, so a smaller, compact image.
Right.
It's good for performance because it's not a huge image file. So the thumbnail will be shown in files. And also they can have a quick look extension to provide a custom preview. So if you have your app with a custom format and you want to allow users to preview it in full screen or whatever, you're going to have an extension that basically loads a custom view. And I've seen demos of custom formats previewed inside files with a custom thumbnail, with a custom quick look screen, and you can do animations, you can do anything you want with the quick look extension, which is very nice. And the same stuff, so both the thumbnail and the quick look preview are also used in Spotlight. So if you search for a file, which is also possible in iOS 11, and if you want to preview the file with 3D Touch, for example, you will see the thumbnail, and then you will see the full screen quick look, which is very, very nice.
Yeah, that is nice. And you're right. There's some nice tools that come along with this because, for instance, if you open up a PDF, you get the markup feature, right?
Yeah, you get the markup. Now there's like a system-wide markup mode. Previously used to be available in just a subset of apps. It was available in Apple Mail, for example, if you wanted to mark up a screenshot or a PDF before sending it to someone. Now it seems to me like every PDF quick look preview has a markup icon, which is like a circular pencil icon in the top toolbar.
Right.
And you open it and you get a host of tools like a pencil. There's like 5 color choices. There's a pen, there's a marker, I think. So it's very nice because you can annotate documents, you can annotate images. It's quite handy. I've used this a bunch. It's the same tools that you get if you take a screenshot in iOS 11. And there's like the floating preview at the bottom. Those are the same tools because the markup view is consistent everywhere.
Yeah, it's always I still find those markup tools really interesting because it really is the iOS version of the preview app on the Mac that we heard rumored for a couple of years and never showed up. And it's basically there. It's just not a standalone app. It's just baked right into the UI of the OS.
Yeah. So there's 2 things that I want to mention quickly before we move on to the third-party stuff. There's the extension has been completely redone. So Apple had a terrible, terrible iCloud Drive extension in iOS 10. If you wanted to save files into iCloud Drive from other apps, you had this insane UI. You had to scroll folders. I know that our friend David Sparks was really a fan of this extension.
Yes, he was.
There's a new one in iOS 11 called Save to Files, and it's much better. The UI makes sense finally. So that's a thumbs up. And also, I still have to test this more deeply, but there's a native iCloud Drive sharing feature, not just for Apple apps. So you can now share with iCloud Drive and collaborate with iCloud Drive on just about any file from any app.
Right.
There's a new collaborate with iCloud button. You press it, you add someone, and it just seems to work just like that.
Yeah, you can create a public link too if you want, if you don't want to just limit it to one person. Because I tried that this morning. I sent you an old PDF just to see how it worked, and it seems to work just fine.
You did send me a PDF. It came up as a blank PDF though, but I accepted the invitation.
Okay.
I think something went wrong in the PDF itself, but the link totally worked.
So interesting, because it was just a PDF version of a New York Times article, I think. So I don't know why that wouldn't work, but I'm not sure what app that was coming from. I'd have to go back and look.
Yeah, maybe it's the paywall. Anyway, third parties can have a lot of control over what they do in files, and there's 2 main aspects to this. So the underlying idea, as I said before, is Apple wants to support multiple clouds, multiple vendors, multiple systems, because they have kind of accepted the fact that people don't just use iCloud Drive. People use Box, Dropbox, Google Drive. We live in a multiple cloud world, and it's not like an admission of defeat. It's more like we're accepting the reality of how things are, which is nice. Developers can implement 2 types of primary integrations. The first one is the document browser. As I was telling you before, you can now have this, technically it's called the browser view controller. It's this unified view for browsing, opening files, accessing the cloud integrations from another app outside of files. So you can do all kinds of things with it. Developers can even choose the way that they present the document browser. It can be a dark interface, it can be white, they can have different tint colors, and it supports all the features that you'd expect. So open in place, which was already supported in iOS 10, now it's even better in iOS 11. You can share files between apps without having to create multiple copies, to create multiple duplicates.
Mm-hmm.
And you can access files contained in other apps using the Documents browser. So it's just, the overall idea is to limit the number of duplicates that you end up with and to give users a consistent, unified interface that doesn't force you to jump back and forth between different UIs, different providers, different pickers. It's all in one place, and it's better than before.
Yeah, this seems like the kind of thing that's going to make a big difference compared to what we had with the document pickers and providers, because, you're right. And with things like open-in and copy-to and
Yeah,
the
I know, right?
pickers, right? I mean, you ended up with it would get hard, because if you were doing a document in one app and wanted to move it somewhere else, it got copied, and then you might need to put it somewhere else, even a third location. It gets copied again, and then you lose track of which is the one you're editing and which one has the most recent changes. That was no good at all, but this is going to bring it all into one place, which is a lot better.
And the second integration is the file provider extension. This is recommended for apps that store files on remote servers, so cloud services basically. And that's why
Yeah.
Apple at WWDC had Dropbox and Box and Google as examples. I assume that those companies have actually committed to making file providers. Again, I'm not sure about Google, but we'll see. So this extension appears in Files, as I've mentioned. It's also in the document browser, and it allows users to open files from an external source directly into Files. And for developers, it means they don't have to write and design a custom UI anymore. They take advantage of the UI of Files. So right now I have a third-party file provider extension on my devices. And when I open this source, it looks like I'm navigating into a folder of files. There's a folder structure. It's the same UI. I can switch between grid view and list view. There's a search feature, same menu. Really, it's meant to be like the Finder extensions on macOS. And Apple didn't want to have the kind of insecure system where companies like Dropbox for years have done crazy hacks and workarounds to inject their UIs into the Finder.
Right.
And on iOS, it's sort of a clean slate for Apple, because they're saying, if you want to integrate with the file manager that we have on the system, you're going to have to support an extension that is modeled on top of sandboxing. It's secure, it's private. And it just seems to me like this is a better way to deal with file management, to keep what we had in iOS 10. It lets us keep everything close together with a consistent behavior, a consistent interface, and yet developers can still do things like, I'm storing these files on my own server, so let me pull them down for the user, let me download them and upload them again, and I don't want to cache them anymore. I think this is a better approach.
Yeah, it's interesting, because what Apple's done is they've provided not just the UI, but they've got all of the stuff under the hood, so you can pull the files into the Files app and detect when changes have been made, and then sync them back with your server and all that stuff. It's all baked into the APIs now. Well, Federico, that is really interesting to me. I think that Files is really ushering in a whole new paradigm, I guess, for how you look at files and manage them and organize them on your iOS devices in a way that I think at the end of the day will be a lot more intuitive for a lot of people. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. A common comment that I've heard from people is that Apple is just stealing from the Mac, and to an extent, maybe, because the Mac has figured out this stuff for a long time. But what I appreciate, I think, is that it doesn't feel like a Mac feature that has been bolted onto iOS. It feels native to iOS, and whether it's the UI or the system based on the extensions, it feels like it's a natural evolution of how things were before, because the file management concept was already being explored with iCloud Drive. But now this system is just much better and it looks better. And I think, we're still far away from the power and all the functionalities of the Finder. I mean, in files on iOS 11, you don't have things like all the custom views that you can set on a per folder basis. You don't have saved searches, or you don't have automation, of course. But I think we'll get there, and I think this is a solid foundation, much better than iCloud Drive used to be. And if this works, if developers support this, and companies like Dropbox and Google and Microsoft roll out integration on day one for iOS 11, or at least in the first couple of months, trying to be optimistic here, I think it'll be much, much better than iOS 10 eventually.
Okay, well, that's it for this week, folks. Thanks again to our sponsors, Today and Zones. We'll be back next week with another episode. We've been at this for a few months, and if you're enjoying the show, please take a moment to leave a review in iTunes. It really does help other people find the show. And until we get back next week, you can always find us both writing at macstories.net and Club Mac Stories, and on Twitter, where Federico is at Viticci. That's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees, JOHN VOORHEES. Talk to you next week, Federico.
Ciao, John.